The Robinson family got lost in space.
Yeah, the series was set in the far future, 1997.
97.
Do you have a name?
My name's Will Robinson, sir. And I'm not a toy, I'm a boy.
Oh, nonsense.
There are television shows that entertain, and then there are television shows that quietly become part of the cultural furniture. The kind of programs that generations grow up with, absorb into their memories, and carry with them long after the final credits roll. Lost in Space, the beloved CBS science fiction series that ran from 1965 to 1968, is without question one of those rare shows. Most people who grew up watching the Robinson family tumble through the cosmos remember the broad strokes. The gleaming silver saucer of the Jupiter 2, the mechanical marvel known as the robot with his wildly gesticulating arms, and of course the theatrical scheming of the insufferable Dr. Smith. It feels like a show you already know everything about. But here is the truth. Lost in Space is far stranger, far more surprising, and far more layered than even its most devoted admirers tend to realize. Beneath the campy humor and the rubber-suited aliens, there's a treasure chest of forgotten history. Behind-the-scenes chaos, accidental decisions that changed everything, and creative choices so bizarre they almost defy explanation. The story of this show is not just a story of a family lost among the stars. It is a story of production that lurched from crisis to inspiration, that stumbled into iconic moments by accident, and that shaped American pop culture in ways that have never been fully appreciated. What follows is a deep dive into things that fans never noticed, rarely discussed, or simply never knew. Some of these facts will reshape the way you think about your favorite episodes. Others will make you laugh, or shake your head in disbelief. All of them are true, and all of them matter. So settle in, because we are about to get lost in space all over again. Before Lost in Space became the colorful, light-hearted family adventure that audiences came to love, it existed in a very different form, one that bears almost no resemblance to the final product. Creator and producer Irwin Allen first developed the concept as a comparatively grounded science fiction drama about a family of colonists sent into deep space, fighting not absurd villains but genuine existential danger. The unaired pilot episode, titled No Place to Hide, was filmed in black and white and presented the Robinson family as a serious ensemble navigating a hostile universe with intelligence and courage. There was no comedic saboteur lurking in the cargo hold. There was no wisecracking mechanical companion. The tone was closer to the serious science fiction literature of the era, the kind of thoughtful, speculative storytelling that writers like Arthur C. Clarke were doing in print. Network executives, after reviewing the pilot, decided this version was missing something. It was technically competent and dramatically coherent, but it lacked the spark of personality that could make audiences fall in love with it week after week. The resulting changes to the format were so sweeping that the original pilot essentially became an entirely different show. Footage from it was eventually folded into the first few episodes of the broadcast version, but the spirit of that darker, more serious vision was quietly buried. Almost nobody today remembers that Lost in Space very nearly launched as prestige science fiction rather than beloved camp. When Dr. Zachary Smith was first conceived and written into a revised version of Lost in Space, he was designed to serve a single, functional narrative purpose. He was a spy and a saboteur, a cold and calculated villain whose treachery would doom the Robinson family to their endless wandering through space. The character was meant to be sinister, a genuine threat, and then he was meant to disappear once that dramatic function had been served. The producers envisioned him as temporary scaffolding, useful in the early episodes and then expendable. What actually happened is one of the great accidental reinventions in television history. Jonathan Harris, the British-trained actor cast in the role, made a private decision early in production that changed everything. He found the villain archetype uninteresting and began, subtly at first and then with increasing boldness, playing Dr. Smith as a coward, a vain, pompous, hilariously self-serving coward who shuddered at the slightest danger and delivered every line as though he were performing Shakespeare for a disapproving audience. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Audiences responded with delight. Harris had not simply adjusted a character. He had invented one. Dr. Smith, as viewers came to know him, theatrical, petulant, endlessly quotable, was almost entirely Jonathan Harris's personal creation, built performance by performance during the first season. The producers, to their credit, recognized what they had and leaned into it. By the time the show reached its second year, Dr. Smith was not just a regular character. He was the show. Jonathan Harris was not merely content to reshape Dr. Smith from within the script. He also engineered a very deliberate public identity for himself through the show's credits. Harris negotiated successfully for his name to appear on screen not as a regular cast member alongside the ensemble, but as a special guest star, an honorific typically reserved for celebrities making limited, prestigious appearances. The audacity of this arrangement is worth pausing on. Harris appeared in virtually every episode of Lost in Space across its entire run. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the show's 2 or 3 most important performers. And yet every week, his credits separated him visually and conceptually from the rest of the cast, signaling to viewers that they were watching someone special, someone elevated, someone above the ordinary run of television acting. It was a masterstroke of personal branding at a time when actors rarely thought in those terms. The credit reinforced Dr. Smith's own inflated self-regard. A man who considered himself superior to everyone around him was being played by an actor who had contractually arranged to be listed that way. The performance and the billing became a single unified statement. Harris understood instinctively that in the entertainment industry, how you are perceived is often as important as what you actually do, and he managed both with remarkable precision. The robot, officially designated B9, Environmental Control Robot, is one of the most recognizable props in the history of American television. His silhouette is instantly iconic. The transparent bubble head, the accordion-ribbed arms, the rotating torso, the blinking lights that conveyed emotion better than many human actors of the era. What most fans have never fully appreciated is how physically brutal it was to actually operate that costume. The robot suit was constructed primarily from fiberglass and metal components, and when fully assembled it weighed in the vicinity of 200 pounds. The performer tasked with wearing it throughout the series was a stuntman named Bob May, who got the job for the straightforward reason that his body could fit inside the costume. Once he was sealed inside, May operated in conditions that would challenge even the most committed actor. Visibility was severely limited. Ventilation was inadequate, meaning temperatures inside the suit could become genuinely dangerous during long shooting days under studio lights. Movement required careful, practiced deliberation. The suit punished careless gestures with bruises and scrapes. May performed all of the robot's physical actions under these conditions, take after take, season after season. Meanwhile, the robot's voice was recorded entirely separately by Dick Tufeld, a veteran voice actor and broadcaster whose deep, authoritative delivery became synonymous with the character's warnings and proclamations. May and Tufeld never actually performed together. They worked in isolation. Their contributions merged in post-production to create the illusion of a single entity. The robot that audiences fell in love with was, in a very literal sense, 2 separate men who rarely interacted, their work stitched together invisibly every single week. Irwin Allen was obsessive about the visual credibility of the Jupiter 2, and one of his more remarkable decisions in building the show's central set was to incorporate actual, functioning computer hardware from the era into the ship's interior. The blinking consoles, the control panels, the surfaces covered in dials and readouts. Many of these were not theatrical fabrications, but genuine electronic equipment sourced from real-world computing systems of the 1950s and early 1960s. The specific machines used were Burroughs B205 computers, which had been employed in government research facilities and corporate data centers during that period. They were already becoming obsolete by the time Allen acquired them, but their physical appearance, banks of switches, glowing indicators, and imposing metallic frames, was exactly what the production needed to make the Jupiter 2 look authentically futuristic. Audiences in 1965 had little context for what a real computer looked like, which meant that the genuine articles were no more or less comprehensible than a fabricated prop would have been. But Allen knew the difference, and for him, that mattered. The commitment to real hardware gave the set a solidity and specificity that purely decorative props rarely achieve. Even today, watching episodes of Lost in Space, the Jupiter 2 interior holds up as a convincing environment, and part of the reason is that some of what you're looking at is real. In the early 1960s, CBS was evaluating multiple science fiction concepts for potential development. Among the properties under consideration was a speculative drama set aboard a starship, built around ideas of exploration, diversity, and philosophical inquiry. The network ultimately passed on that concept in favor of Irwin Allen's family-oriented space adventure. The show CBS declined to develop was Star Trek, which went on to NBC and became one of the most enduring franchises in entertainment history. This decision is frequently cited in television history discussions, but its full implications are rarely examined. CBS chose Lost in Space because it appeared safer, more commercial, and more immediately accessible to a broad family audience. Star Trek's creator, Gene Roddenberry, was pitching something more ambitious and conceptually challenging, a show that used science fiction as a vehicle for social commentary. CBS executives did not believe that approach would generate consistent ratings. They were not entirely wrong in their short-term analysis. Lost in Space outperformed Star Trek in its early seasons. What CBS failed to anticipate was the long-term cultural trajectory of Roddenberry's vision. Star Trek struggled in its original run and was canceled after 3 seasons, only to return in syndication and grow into a phenomenon of staggering proportions. The executives who chose Lost in Space over Star Trek made a commercially defensible decision that, in retrospect, is one of the most consequential miscalculations in the history of network television. The campy, comedic tone that defines Lost in Space in the popular memory was not part of the original creative intention and did not emerge from a single planned decision. It evolved organically and somewhat chaotically out of the collision between Jonathan Harris's comedic performance instincts and the network's awareness that the Batman television series, which premiered in January 1966, was generating enormous ratings with its deliberately over-the-top, tongue-in-cheek approach to genre material. CBS saw an opportunity and signaled to the Lost in Space production team that leaning into humor would likely expand their audience. The result was a tonal shift between the first and second seasons that was so pronounced it effectively made the show into something new. Characters who had been written as competent, serious professionals became supporting players in comedic set pieces. The stakes of each episode dropped considerably. The science fiction elements, never especially rigorous, became almost purely decorative, backdrops for comic interactions between Dr. Smith and a robot, or for increasingly outlandish alien encounters. Guy Williams, who had signed on expecting to lead a dramatic series, found himself progressively sidelined as the show restructured itself around its most popular comedic pairing. The transformation made Lost in Space more popular in the short term and almost certainly contributed to its cancellation in the long term, as the creative well ran dry and audiences grew tired of escalating absurdity with no dramatic substance to balance it. Lost in Space presented itself as an original science fiction adventure, but its creative foundations were borrowed from sources that most viewers would never have suspected. The immediate basis of the show was a comic book series called Space Family Robinson, published beginning in 1962 by Gold Key Comics, which followed a family of scientists exploring the galaxy after becoming separated from civilization. Irwin Allen licensed the concept from Gold Key and used it as the structural template for his television series. What is less widely known is that Space Family Robinson was itself a deliberate reworking of a 19th century adventure novel, Johann David Weiss's The Swiss Family Robinson, published in 1812. Weiss's book told the story of a shipwrecked European family building a new life on an uninhabited island, using their collective intelligence and resourcefulness to thrive in a hostile environment. The novel was among the most widely read adventure stories of the 19th century and had already been adapted multiple times in various media before anyone thought to send the concept into space. The thematic core of Lost in Space, a family isolated from civilization, relying on each other and their own ingenuity to survive in an alien environment, is therefore not an original science fiction invention at all. It is a 200-year-old adventure story wearing a spacesuit. The television industry of the 1960s operated on tight budgets and tight schedules, and practical resourcefulness often trumped creative purity. One of the more striking examples of this pragmatism involved the makeup and prosthetics departments of Lost in Space and Star Trek, 2 shows that were, at least in theory, competitors vying for the same science fiction audience. Despite their rivalry, both productions were part of the same broader ecosystem of Los Angeles studio work, and their crews overlapped in ways that created opportunities for creative borrowing. Alien, prosthetics developed for Star Trek, including some of the distinctive pointed ear designs associated with Vulcan characters, found their way onto the faces of alien characters in Lost in Space episodes. Rather than investing time and money in developing entirely original alien designs from scratch, the Lost in Space crew took advantage of existing molds and materials from their rivals' production. The result was that certain aliens in Lost in Space look, on close examination, strikingly similar to certain aliens in Star Trek. Audiences watching both shows in their original broadcast runs likely never registered this overlap. Today, for anyone who examines the makeup work carefully, the connection is unmistakable, a small, strange footnote to relationship between two shows that defined an era of American science fiction television. By the time Lost in Space entered its third and final season in the fall of 1967, the creative energy that had driven the show in its first 2 years had largely dissipated. The writers were running low on viable concepts, the budget constraints were becoming increasingly difficult to manage, and the pressure to top previous episodes with more outrageous, attention-grabbing storylines was producing diminishing returns. The result was a season of television that veered into territories so bizarre and tonally unstable that even sympathetic viewers found it difficult to defend. Episodes from the third season include plot lines involving humanoid vegetables with the power to transform humans into plant life, encounters with alien characters whose behavior defies any internal dramatic logic, and comedic set pieces that abandon even the pretense of science fiction in favor of pure slapstick. The Robinson family, once the heart of the show, became almost incidental to their own series, bystanders in stories that were really about whatever comic interaction the writers could devise between Dr. Smith and the alien guest character of the week. The show's ratings declined sharply. CBS canceled Lost in Space after the third season, and the planned fourth season, which would have returned the show to a somewhat more serious tone, never materialized. The series ended not with conclusion, but simply with a stop, leaving the Robinson family perpetually adrift, which in retrospect feels like an oddly appropriate ending for a show that had itself lost its way. For all the attention that has always been paid to the robot's mechanics and Dr. Smith's theatrical excess, the quieter human performances at the center of Lost in Space have never received the recognition they deserve. June Lockhart, who played family matriarch Maureen Robinson, brought a warmth and steadiness to the role that anchored the show's emotional credibility, even as the scripts grew increasingly unreliable. Her performance communicated genuine maternal care and intelligence without condescension. She played Maureen as a scientist and a mother simultaneously, never allowing the character to be reduced to a domestic stereotype. Similarly, child actor Billy Mumy brought an authenticity to Will Robinson that was genuinely unusual for television of the period. Mumy had the rare ability to deliver dialogue that could easily have sounded precious or staged with a natural